I'm obviously a Labour politician, so feel free to push back on any of this.
Don't worry about that, mate.
But I was going to say, just on that thing about energy companies, we were asking the government for God knows how long to implement a windfall tax that would have put more of this money back into the public purse.
Yeah, definitely.
And that you eventually dragged them kicking and screaming to do it, and then you haven't recouped all that you could have to make the energy firms pay their fair share. And it also frustrates. Oh, you've got me on a rant now.
No, sorry, go for it, mate.
Absolutely.
But just one other thing that frustrates me is Jeremy Hunt has been stood there.
You're just going to say, what frustrates me is Jeremy Hunt.
Full stop. What frustrates me is that Jeremy Hunt at the autumn statement framed all of this in terms of like, oh, we've had to make some really hard choices to give you this tax cut. Like, oh, it's been so hard for us. I think he's forgotten that a year ago it was a Tory Chancellor and Prime Minister who crashed the UK economy and put us in this situation in the first place. It's fine to say we've had COVID and the war in Ukraine. That's very true. But things have been made so much worse.
I think that's something that we probably need to ask you about, and what your views on it are, because obviously it's obviously a national problem. So you're limited on your input and what you can do with that. But what do you see anything changing with that in the foreseeable future? Or is it here to stay, as it were, or what do you think is gonna? Go.
Yeah. I think. So obviously it's a complicated picture, right?
It's a very complicated picture, and it goes back decades. So
you talk about the cost of living crisis, and what the government says is, look, we've had a war in Ukraine, we've had COVID, we've had to make some really tough decisions, and basically we're all living through the fallout of it. And we can't pretend those things haven't happened. It's definitely had an economic impact, and a severe one, and nobody's questioning that. The question is whether the government has made the right decisions to go far enough to protect people before those things happened, and then given them enough support after it's happened. So if you take the energy crisis for a really, as an example, it's true that the entire world was exposed to a big energy shock when Russia invaded Ukraine, but was the UK government, which has been in place now since 2010, sufficiently prepared in terms of energy storage to be able to deal with that shock in the way other European countries were?
Yeah,
I don't think that's the case. And then if you look most recently at the autumn statement, the Chancellor has been saying that he's offered a big tax cut to people, so he's cut national insurance and things like that.
Sure.
But that's in a context where the tax burden is the highest it's been for 70 years.
Yeah, you're taxing 20% out of 8% higher than it was in the first place.
And when people, equivalent tax rises over the course of this Parliament have been equivalent to a 10% increase in the national insurance. So it's all fair and good to say you're cutting taxes, but are you actually doing enough to make a material difference to the pound in people's pocket?
No, exactly.
I don't really think it's going far enough.
No, I'd agree.
And a lot of that comes down to the government taking better decisions about how to protect people.